All right, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining our Ultimate Culture webinar for December. It's all about turbocharging community impact, and I have Steve and Seth from Wipfli with us today to talk about culture development, the connection to impact, and specifically the nonprofit space. So welcome, guys. Why don't you introduce yourself to get us kicked off?
Thanks, Tim. Happy to be here this morning, and thank you for joining us in this and helping to lead us through this morning. I'm Steve Lipton. I lead our nonprofit and government practice at Wipfli. Turn it over to Seth.
Thanks. I'm happy to be here as well. I'm Seth Fine. I'm a culture and change consultant with Wipfli and a long-term member of our nonprofit group and practice.
All right, Steve, why don't you tell us a little bit about Wipfli
Sure.
and get us kicked off on the connection to culture?
Happy to do it. So first of all, we're broadcasting this morning from our winter conference here in Orlando, Florida, and we thought it'd be a great opportunity to leverage a little bit off of that. We have a few hundred folks attending a number of sessions on different topics around leadership, finance, etc. At our conference here, which is one of two major conferences that we do every year, the second being our Las Vegas conference in the summer. Wipfli is what's called a super regional firm with offices stretching from California to Maine. Kind of along the northern tier right now of the country through Montana, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois. Actually, we do go down into Virginia a little bit. So I guess a little bit south of the Mason-Dixon line as well. We're about 2,000 folks. Our nonprofit and government practice is in the top 3 practices of our firm, and is really focused on helping organizations succeed and develop, offering everything from audit through all kinds of consulting services around strategy and technology and such.
Awesome. So we've been collaborating for probably about 3 years now. You have lots of team members accredited, really excited about the future of the impact we can make. Why was it attractive to get some tools around culture, some new thought leadership out there to make this connection between culture and making an impact, especially in nonprofit?
Sure. Well, when you sit there and that's really a great question. As we work with organizations, we know that change is huge, and we know that organizations are going through a huge aspect of change. And we also know that nonprofits, there's all kinds of pressures out there. There's everything from the new tax law. There is funding pressure. There is donor pressure. And yet, we know that the services that we provide and the things that we have to do in the communities that we work in is more important than ever. The need has certainly not diminished. And so as we look at our organizations and how they've been structured to serve, it's really important that we flip that from the past of how we serve to the future of how we will serve. And what that means, we need to change a little bit of our organizational behavior going forward. And culture is obviously a key component of changing that organizational behavior.
Yeah, I've been excited in working with nonprofits because the approach we'll talk about today that I know you also advocate is connecting this to the purpose and mission of the organization. And in nonprofits, obviously, there's some unbelievable stories, connections, really meaningful impact. And in for-profit organizations, sometimes that connection point can be questioned. Oh, it's all about money or who knows what. But in most nonprofits, I mean, people seem united around their purpose and mission a little more clearly, and that's like the first step here. Does that make any sense?
Incredibly cause-driven, and that's the exciting part about working in this industry. I've had the pleasure of working with nonprofits for about 25 years of my 30-plus year career. That kind of hurts to say, but I'll throw it out there, making me feel old again. But you know, when I sit there and I think of the joy and the opportunity, and we look at an organization that we know that we've helped, and to watch the impact that they have on their community, it's just tremendous.
Well, let's dive right in. And I know we've got 3 stories to cover. Seth, you want to cover today's plan?
Yeah, pretty simple plan. We're going to talk about how we see some of our nonprofits who have become catalysts in their community for increased impact, have used their understanding and measurement of culture to move and advance their priorities forward, and especially in terms of growth, dealing with the change that Steve mentioned, and trying to make sure that they're impacting more families, more people, in more places. So each of the 3 stories that we have will cover that catalyst in action kind of theme.
Okay.
We'll talk quickly about how culture can work for you if you're a nonprofit that's struggling with some of the same things, has challenges that you can share with some of our stories, and what you can do with culture and with a better understanding of culture to move your goals forward and make a bigger impact. And we'll just wrap up with 5 secrets to success and a little bit about our Catalyst program for other nonprofits who are looking to get involved in this.
Awesome. So let's jump right in. This is a slide we use often regarding the connection to solving hopefully some culture challenges and some things that might be getting in the way of making an impact or that we're trying to improve. I know you've been using this slide also. Seth, why did it resonate so much with you?
The biggest thing is that we do a lot of these trainings. We do them around the country. We have the 2 major trainings that we do that Steve mentioned. We do regional trainings, and we work with clients and nonprofits of all types, all sizes, across coast to coast, top to bottom of the country. And by far and away, these themes that you've listed at Human Synergistics really resonate with almost every one of them. There's some kind of change at multiple levels going on for each of these areas that are either challenges or opportunities, depending on how you look at them. And so we start by really listening and trying to understand where each nonprofit that we work with is coming from, and by far and away they're listing 3, 4, or 5 of these themes as their greatest challenge or top priority.
Yeah, I know I've done some of these sessions with you, and we'll say, hey, which of these resonate with you? And with many nonprofits, it's all of them, or at least most of them. So let's jump right in and talk a little bit about the connection of culture and strategy and supporting that purpose.
So as we sit here and we think of strategy in our organizations, and we think of the strategic opportunities that we have to address as organizations going forward, how do we make that change? How do we impact it? We all have been through a strategic planning process, or I should say, hopefully all of us have been through a strategic planning process at some point in our career. And we sit there and we get together in a room and we big think for maybe a day or 2 days, and we come up with these great ideas and things that we want to put together and we want to make happen in our organization, and then we write them down, and then we put them in a nice little binder, right? And we go back to our day job, and we sit there and go, a year later, what happened to those? And part of it, what we have to recognize and understand here is, as we look at strategy and we look at the things that we want to accomplish in our organizations, is they all require change, and they require change in our individual behaviors, but more importantly, they require change in our organizational behavior. And then when we look, what's the greatest component of change in our organizational behavior? It's the culture. It's the things that we do. And Seth and Tim are going to talk a little bit more here in detail about what that means and how that looks. But the question that I would pose to everybody to think about as we're walking through some of these points is, how can I be more successful in taking these great thoughts and these strategies that I have and really bringing them to life and really using them to create the impact that I want to create in my community?
All right, sounds good. Well, let's dive right into a little bit of our first example. We've talked already a little bit about culture and strategy. Seth, I know you use some of the other slides and tools we commonly use, especially these around culture and climate.
We do. It's really important for the clients that we're working with to both understand that and educate on what culture means and how does that compare and contrast with the climate or the perceptions that they might have measured before, or at least that they can name and articulate. It's a very critical component of how we work with clients on a strategic level when we're doing strategic planning, as well as mapping change and trying to figure out where change is going to make the most impact. And so we make the differentiation for them and with them between their climate, the way things are around here right now in the current state, and the organizational culture, the underlying expectations. So we really have bought into, and our clients buy into as well, the language of expectations, the behaviors and values and shared beliefs that are going on that they might not be able to see or measure, but because they're living in it, they're breathing it, swimming in it all the time, and the importance and value of measuring that and comparing it to what they can work on in the climate. So we make this distinction very clearly early on and up front, and I think it's good context for the story that we're going to tell about our client up in the Lake Erie area.
All right, sounds good.
So this particular client of ours, a large nonprofit, very stalwart in their community, a very legacy organization, 50 years old plus, really understood the clusters of behavior and styles and bought into that essentially and really resonated with them in one of our trainings. They were going about getting ready to do a strategic planning effort. A lot of nonprofits, if they're grant funded in any way, are mandated to do strategic planning in a certain amount of time, sometimes 3 years, sometimes 5. Others are maybe more proactive in doing strategic plan check-ins all the time. And this particular agency was getting stuck. essentially, on not just thinking about strategic planning in a more inclusive and diverse way, including their community, which most nonprofits have to do, but also why can't we implement, why can't we get traction on some of the major priorities and big goals we have. And when we showed them and helped them to understand the circumplex and some of the styles, and especially the passive defensive style,
Sure.
and aggressive defensive styles, they recognize that in themselves. So the first step in all of this is to understand that there is a way to measure, there is a way to see yourself in a certain way and see what your ideal is as well, and then map the gap between those two. So it was really important for them to understand, like you said, Tim, kind of the basics of a culture model for them to wrap their arms around before strategic planning, and then using that information going forward.
All right.
And I want to really add to what Seth is saying, because I think the really important part is we all think of culture as this ubiquitous thing, right? This thing that's all around us that we see, we feel, but we don't know how to measure it, and we don't know how to change it. And what Seth is really bringing to light there is we now have the opportunity to measure our culture. And as part of our strategies and part of the being successful with our strategies, create methods and ways that we can successfully get over the bridge that we're talking about here.
So this agency had a particular interest in understanding what their ideal culture was as part of their strategic plan. So one of their goals, a 10-year visionary goal, was to map their ideal culture, understand where they thought as a leadership team and as a group they needed to be and wanted to go, and then they could use their current culture assessment, which we also conducted for them, to start creating frameworks and action plans and transformation initiatives internally to align better with what their ideal culture was. So they almost treat the ideal culture as one of their major long-term visionary initiatives or goals to try to reach.
So we often talk about culture being all about uniting your organization behind your purpose, strategy, key performance priorities. I mean, is that type of approach really resonating in nonprofits?
Absolutely. I think in those nonprofits that we're working with that have been stuck, that have been sort of burned with their inability or ability to push forward and unite their organization, especially in siloed organizations that are run based on delivery of services from different grant sources, from different funders that have been built up over time. The ability for them to unite and become one kind of force around their mission and their values, and then deliver that in different ways, has been really powerful in terms of their ability to, again, make an impact, and an impact bigger than they can if they were treating it one-off, one by one service. Even if they had some kind of case management tools or software, that's used to be the panacea. Can we have one view of the customer, one view of the client? That doesn't solve their cultural issues that are underneath all of that.
Okay, well, continue with this example.
Yeah, so this is the actual example from the ideal that I mentioned that was really important to this client. Their ideal is on the right side. Their dominant current culture styles now are conventional and oppositional. It's not their actual chart. They're not their actual current culture behind the scenes there, but this is their actual dominant styles now. So when we laid out their strategic plan, including their ideal and all the different transformation initiatives that they wanted to pursue, 5, 6, 7 initiatives that were really important to them, and we showed them, and they reported to us through qualitative and quantitative research that this is what they were facing in their organization. We had a lot of work to do, and a real heart-to-heart conversations among the board, the strategic leadership team that they had put together, and the executive director about what it might take in order to realign some of their styles and behaviors with their ideal and to better pursue some of their key strategic objectives. And you can tell just by what's on the page there that they, it's an emotional experience to see that that's really what was going on. They knew it in their hearts. They could see that there was some confrontation avoidance, that we didn't want to really challenge ourselves. We couldn't look in the mirror. We knew things were changing in the community drastically, but inside the organization, we hadn't changed enough. We hadn't seen enough proactivity or an ability to really oppose the status quo that existed. And so this ability to measure gave them the opportunity to, in their strategic plan, again, focus on what they needed to do stylistically with expectations and behaviors to align to some of those strategic initiatives and really get them off to a jump start on making a bigger impact from a strategic standpoint for their community and for their employees as well.
Well, I want to referring back to specifically the nonprofit space, when you're able to say, well, what's the cost of us accepting the status quo, of avoiding confrontation, not opposing things indirectly, when you go back to the purpose of the organization, and whether it's educating children, solving poverty problems. I mean, the cost of a culture like this can be pretty significant, even if the nonprofit's already accomplishing amazing things.
Yeah.
You know, the opportunity cost is huge for a
enormous.
defensive culture.
To put it in real terms, we were, in our qualitative work, we're able to interview some of the funders or potential funders of this agency in their community. And one large one, a giant insurance company, had many, many millions of dollars to give back to the community and had a vested interest in doing that and wanted to give it to this very well-known, well-respected legacy organization, but couldn't because they wouldn't engage in the conversation to change the ways that they were delivering, to change the ways that they were engaging with their own employees, their staff, the community at large. So they had it put right in front of them that this style that they had adopted over time unintentionally, but with many consequences, was impacting their current needs for funding and their current ability to make that connection with a big funder in their community.
It's a great example.
Well, and a lot of these folks, you know, in our nonprofit world especially, they're people-focused organizations, right? And we sit there and we look at the styles that are up on that screen right now, and we know in a people-focused organizations, people don't want to hurt people, right? So a lot of these conversations don't happen, but just through the natural course of events. And then we have a tool like this where we can bring this to the forefront and make this conversation safe, right? And we can start to engage people to say, oh, you know what, maybe I should have been saying something, or let's focus on something a little bit different other than just being, you know, supportive of each other, or what we think is supportive of each other.
Awesome. All right, so let's continue and give some more scenarios and examples where this information is useful. And I love the innovation area specifically because a lot of people don't realize how totally intertwined culture development and innovation are. I know Edgar Schein, and I'll give this example often, he talks about you not being even aware of your culture at all unless you have to adapt to something, right? We just make the work happen. We have that great impact. We don't even think about the culture and uniting people. But the second there's some change or a new strategy or whatever, and whoa, you know, we avoid confrontation here. How are we going to manage that change? Suddenly the culture challenges are important to identify and be intentional about. Do you see the same on the innovation front?
You know, we kind of kick this off by saying that the way we're doing things,
right,
or the way that we have been doing things, is not the way that we need to be doing things in the future. And I think as we look at that process of how do we get from where we've been to where we want to go, that change is going to be hard. And that understanding the innovation and the ways that we can do things. I've had the opportunity in recent weeks to sit on a panel regarding data, using data and the quality of data and how we can use data to improve the impacts that we make on our community or the impacts of the people that we serve. You know, one example, I sit on a board for a Boys and Girls Club. And as we sit there and we look at a traditional data in a Boys and Girls Club, we measured how many kids walked in the door over the course of the year. Well, that was great, and it was nice to know that we served I'll make up a number, 3,000 kids over the course of the year. But what was the impact that we had on those kids? And so the change now starts to say, well, we don't just have to measure how many kids walked in the door, but now we have to measure what's their success rate at school as a result of walking in the door. How many went to trade school or college and became a successful wage earner in their community and a contributor back to their community going forward. So now we have to think about ways to begin to use the tools that we have and the things that are out there that we can grasp into our organization, not just to provide those core services and go out to meet people, but how do we measure those things? How do we help understand the impact that we're having and the measures with that so that we can help our organizations go forward and do more and understand where we have the greatest impact, understand how we have the greatest impact. All of those pieces really begin to change the way that we focus and change the way that we need to interpret how we do our work.
And I know we've been talking about just this week about some of the work we've been doing at Human Synergistics to connect culture and performance. And in most organizations, there's bright spots and there's segments that hey, they're maybe a little more constructive in the terms of our model. They're more inclusive. They're more effective in getting things done. Whenever we map that to business results, profitability, I mean, it always pans out that, yes, those more constructive bright spots, they're making more money. we assume the same in the nonprofit spaces. We're making greater impact, but I know we want to work together to absolutely confirm that, have the case studies and examples, so it's easier to, I guess, get people on board about why on earth would we connect culture and this innovation strategy or other improvement effort.
You know, a little bit back to Seth's story there in that community action world where we had grants and programs that tended to work in silos. The Head Start grant, they got their money and they did their thing, and the Senior Living grant got their grant and did their thing, and all of the different workforce development got their grant and did their thing. Sometimes they had separate technology departments in the organization, they had separate finance departments in the organization. They were all kind of working their things. They were a strip mall sharing a roof, but they were independent stores or independent programs. Well, we know that to be successful in our community and to really serve the people in our community, we can't do that. We have to work together. But that's a culture change for the organization.
That's right.
And understanding how they come together is a really, really big, hard step.
Well, let's go into the second example here. Seth, another slide you often use. That we use also.
We use it quite a bit, and I think that it resonates because most of the nonprofits, probably 80% plus, just like the numbers show, don't understand their culture. They don't know how to articulate it. They might feel that things are going right. They might have a good sense that they have some leading indicators or lagging indicators that they did something right. They don't know what it is. They might have done a couple things wrong and took some missteps, but they don't know the consequences or the ripple effect of those things. And then the belief that they have the right culture is also kind of misplaced. Many progressive leaders, or if we've gone through 2 generations of leaders, and the legacy leaders of nonprofits that started a while ago are gone, and the new generations coming in, they might have a good sense that things need to change. The culture isn't in the right place. We're not quite aligned, but how do we do that? And what is it that we really want to aspire to that would make this work are 2 big challenges for our nonprofits that we're working with on a regular basis. So the story that comes after this is about an organization that felt like it had done many things right. They were seeing the outcomes that they wanted to see, but they didn't quite know why. Like what was it that we can attribute that to? Where is it that leadership made the right steps? Where was it that we set the right expectations and started coaching and shaping all of the behaviors that were going on? And so we were able to come in with other operational improvements and impacts and performance impacts, and also measure the culture alongside of that. And so this is a story about a central Arkansas organization that was serving both rural and town communities, and they had many programs just like Steve mentioned, and they had made the hard choices to streamline those to what the community needed most, as well as to what they could best deliver, which is a hard thing for many organizations and nonprofits to do, because they're relied upon in the community to offer basic services, to do things for seniors, children, kids in school, kids in high school, adults. There's a lot of people with a lot of needs. This agency had made over the past 7 years with a new leadership team some tough decisions about who they were, what their mission was, what their purpose in life was. And as we got to them and they asked us to come in, they wanted to understand, did we do that well? Was it successful? And can we do more of that in the future? Can we continue to adapt? And if we do it the way we did it in the past, is it going to have the same kind of outcomes for us? And so we were able to measure. You can go to the next slide.
Well, before I go to that, I do want to emphasize here, I love this example because so often, and I think it's just the marketplace that has driven this, that, well, we don't need to look at our culture because we don't have a big problem. When really it's the more progressive organizations, in many cases, are wanting to understand it so that they can continue it, grow it. So I know we're working to shift this expectation in the marketplace that, culture's connected to problem, and it's much more connected to purpose. And you're going to be left behind if you aren't on the leading edge and making this connection, not, let's wait till we have a problem and then maybe we'll consider it.
Yeah, that's a strong concept, is that we often are brought in to help with crises and to put out fires. And if we're getting there at that point, we can measure and we will. Right. And yet it's a little too late in terms of the amount of time that we have then to unwind all of that and re-prepare for the coming changes and the adaptability we have to have going forward. So always a nice thing and an important thing to be proactive and to make sure that you can capture that magic in a bottle and understand how to name it, use language around it, and plan for the future.
So let's talk about this good example, very constructive culture.
So this agency's not ideal impact of their culture, but their actual current operating culture is what's portrayed there in the circumflex on the left, and their outcomes from our OCI OER reports are on the right, and you can see it's probably hard to read, but there's a historical average that Human Synergistics provides us from their normative database, and of course there are constructive norms and averages in there as well. This organization that had a suspicion that they were doing things the right way could now show and point to where that was coming from. They have a strongly humanistic, encouraging culture, many behaviors and leadership expectations aligned to that, and they discourage obviously a lot of more aggressive styles with, of course, in almost every nonprofit, some dependent and conventional. We still have to meet our funders' needs. We still have to be in compliance with many, many rules. But in this case, we had a strong backbone of where that culture had come from, the history of that culture, and now we understood where it was right now and how we can move forward by continuing to underscore those behaviors, make sure they were intentional, and then they were built into all the initiatives they have going on going forward. And real quick story about this agency is that one of the reasons they brought us in was to assess their finance organization to make sure that they could bring in capacity from surrounding nonprofits where they thought they had a best practice model in place. They used us to confirm that their model was strong, their controls were in place, their systems were solid, so they could take on the extra capacity, actually earn more fees. And at the same time, they wanted to know, was it a mesh? Was there a mesh with these other agencies around them? Could we, in our humanistic, encouraging style, also take on work from other agencies and kind of be a fit with the people we had to work with in collaboration out in the community? And they're able to now name that, show that, talk to the other agencies in a way that probably makes sense, but the other agencies don't know, what our culture is, what your culture is. We're not gonna come in and try to take over and take your agency over. We can actually talk about collaboration in the community without getting into the dreaded merger or acquisition words, which nonprofits don't usually like to talk about.
So in this case, even though it's, we're not trying to educate everyone on the whole model, but there's a task side and then there's a people side, and you can see that it's more blue on more the people side of our constructive styles. Did that come up as far as the task, the achievement oriented, the impact we're making, how we're organizing this?
It's interesting.
We had a question from the audience about, hey, can you give me a little more of the how-to?
Absolutely, yeah. The executive director and I, as we first went over her results, we're talking about this in terms of right brain, left brain. We're a right brain organization. We think about creativity, innovation, adaptability, people. And left brain we don't have as much of, other than in this fiscal department. How can we get more data centric, to Steve's points earlier? How can we put more rigor around some of the goals we're trying to achieve in the measures? And we were able to have that conversation. Well, that's not really embedded in the DNA of your culture right now. That's going to be something that you have to reach for and strive for. And we were able to use the circumplex to describe how, why, where that was coming from. We don't have as many task leaders at the ideal level. We're not seeing that in your culture right now. Luckily, they're kind of a core team of 70 people, and they can reach across the different teams and departments to create a cross-functional culture and strategy team as they move forward and find that skill set and find the people in their organization who do take measurement seriously, who can get results and data to pull in and match up with how their culture styles really can exhibit. So we talked about growing the style over in the achievement zone directly with this client.
And just in your short explanation there, you talked about a lot of important concepts there. They had a core team. Yeah. They had an area they wanted to focus on to build this more task orientation connected to measurements. That's right. Let's make some progress in a particular area, learn how to do it in a more task-oriented, achievement-oriented way. Right. As we figure that out for us, then it's much easier to start saying, well, now how do we apply that in some other area of our strategy or plan?
Absolutely.
Well, I think that's key to this approach here, as we look at and get this data from the culture survey and begin to understand what the culture looks like in the organizations. We now get to develop very specific strategies and action steps. Right. To begin to execute and the change that Seth is talking about there of how do we, now I know that I have to engage this other part of my organization and this strong culture that's over here, if I'm going to try to pull this together and make it happen.
Important points from both of you is we are never talking about working on the culture itself. We're always talking about the context of the changes, the specific changes they're trying to make, their top business priority, and how do we bring culture into that conversation as an enabler, as something that can make them accelerate their performance, accelerate their time to achieve something new and adapt. We're never working on the culture directly. So that's even though we're showing a lot of charts from our culture results, we always have other action plans, other business priorities that we're shaping and using the culture information to inform.
So it's what's the priority or business problem? How does it connect to supporting our purpose or mission?
Absolutely.
Right? Well, who's the team that's going to drive it? Right? And what's going to be our approach to manage the work with that team so it's sensitive to the defensive areas. In the case of our first example hey, we've got to create some safe conversations, some intentional conversations in those one area, because we've got to figure out how to do this and be more open to it. In this case, hey, let's use our people orientation, but get some task focus here, and we can do this.
Yeah, they really wanted to remeasure the survey. When can we remeasure and see how we're doing? And let's measure some of the other outcomes, the other things you're trying to achieve first. We can come back to this in year 2, year 3, and see if the culture has been shaped because of the approach and the results from all the other things we're trying to achieve.
Beautiful, beautiful. All right, we've got a third example. Again, we're just going to hit at a pretty high level. And mergers and acquisitions, most might say mergers and acquisitions in nonprofits, it's a pretty big thing these days, isn't it?
It's huge. And as we sit there and we look at our communities and we look at the funding pressures that are out there and we look at the servicing needs that are going on there, there's something to be said for creating a little bit more scale in our communities and bringing folks together to share resources, share ideas, share the things that we need to do and provide to our communities, whatever that service might be. And when we do that, we kind of think, again, maybe through a little bit of traditional eyes and a traditional approach as we go forward there. We start with, well, okay, you have a complementary program to my program, or we're doing the same program. We could do it better if we're doing it together. Something like this. We start there and we have, okay, that fits. Then what's the next thing we go to? Financials. How do we financially make this work? And so we work on our balance sheet and our income statement and all of the things. And then what's the next thing we go to? We go to an org chart, right? Yeah. And we sit there and we say, okay, now how do we're going to have to, maybe we have 2 less people here or 1 less person here. And how do we make that work together? But never through that process have we really gone back and asked the question, can we really work together? Are we really focused on the same work styles, methodologies, things that we want to do? That culture piece of how the organization fits together. We generally and traditionally have decided that culture when the 2 CEOs of the organization sit down and decide if they like each other. And if they like each other, guess what happens? We decide, well, everybody must like each other, right? So we just figure and make a big assumption that it all comes together. And I just actually sat through with one nonprofit. They just had to unwind a merger because they found out, not because it didn't financially make sense, not because it didn't programmatically make sense, but the people couldn't work together. The communities weren't a cultural fit with each other as well on top of that. And as they came together, they said, we missed something here.
Right. And it's not that eventually they couldn't work through that, but if their starting place is so radically different,
right,
it's going to be a rocky trail.
Right.
But even if you choose to go down that path, better to be informed by it
Absolutely.
and intentional about it than, oh my gosh, all the drama and hallway discussions start instead of really getting it in the strategy and integration plan.
That's right.
So let's talk about this visual that you use.
Yeah, so we like this visual from Human Synergistics as well. It describes a little bit more of what Steve was talking about. If we have a match up at the top and we can articulate that our styles can at least coexist, if not collaborate and kind of come together down in the depths of the organization at the program level, in the different departments, all the different supervisors, line level leaders, different cultures can exist within different teams and different groups of people. And with our tool set, we're able to show where are we going to potentially have some good synergy and sort of confluence of people and teams, whether it's program level, department level, or administrative level, and where we might have some conflicts based on the styles that people most exhibit and what their current operating culture is. Along with this, we can also talk about the different ideals of 2 agencies that might be talking about mergers of different programs or the whole agency itself, and do they have similar ideals? Are their values really articulated in a similar way, or do they just see themselves similarly in the community and the perceptions are the same? We can break those down, again, climate versus culture. Are we really looking at an ideal culture that's similar in ways to each other? And so that I like that graphic because it really represents the complexity of all that information and all those different styles and expectations and behaviors that are going on within any organization.
And it's really important what you said before too, Tim, is that it's not that we can't overcome those things, but we can't overcome them if we don't know that they exist.
That's right.
Or we find out too late when we're already going like this instead of going like this. And so when we have that opportunity to sit down, and where do you fit this in the M&A process? That's sometimes a good question. We got to make sure some of these other things are in place, right? That we want to be together, that all of those things. And it's probably when you're getting close to saying we're almost ready to go and make this happen, because as we measure these cultures, we obviously have to be able to tell a story to the people, right, that are getting participating in this survey and participating in this process. So it's probably a little bit towards the end of the M&A process, but it needs to be part of that M&A process.
We'll often tell people, well, if you're evaluating potential acquisitions, you should at least do it on yourself,
right?
Get the language, get the understanding of this going. Even without doing the survey on potential partners, you'll be able to recognize differences and wow, is this a really kind of aggressive command and control organization? Hey, are people really included, or is there a lot of passive stuff going on? So just by understanding your own culture, you're better armed to understand potential partners and all the cues about what they're really their culture might be all about.
Right.
I sat in one M&A meeting where actually two boys and girls clubs were talking to each other, and I watched the CEO sit there and really kick off the meeting by talking about how great we are.
Okay.
Right. And I sat there and I watched the body language of the potential merger candidate, and they were like, wow, right? That's really cool. And so it kind of, you can sometimes see that. Right. And sometimes it becomes obvious in situations, but there are other times when you're a little bit in I'll call it a sales process.
You got it.
Right. And you're maybe on your best behavior.
Exactly.
In that process, and maybe not showing your true colors in that process. And so again, when we can get down to the core measure here and understand it, sometimes we get it right away. Sometimes maybe we're masking things a little bit.
Well, there are many CEOs or executive directors that are going to, be proud and say, yeah, we just go along with things. We preserve the status quo.
Right.
We like unhealthy competition.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. So let's talk about this example.
So we're calling this client situation facing change on the Iron Range. The Iron Range is northern Minnesota, where I'm from. I'm from Twin Cities. And we were asked by two of our clients who are neighbors with good fences, so they've been neighbors for a long time, to come and take a look at a potential merger of the agencies. Big deal for organizations that have been around a long time and serve communities that might look the same on paper, especially for city folk like us, but have actually many, many differences, not even taking into account the cultures of the organizations or their communities. But the things that they shared were both executive directors were on their way out based on retirement age, and they were facing the daunting task of bringing in new leadership for both organizations. And they had gone through some executive director sharing between the neighbors because they were geographically close, and experimented with that with some success and some failures. They didn't know why, again, that they had some success and some failure in that regard. And they asked us to come in and essentially assess if the merger would be a positive thing going forward and a negative thing, what are the pluses and minuses, and ultimately what our recommendation was. We weren't comfortable, to Steve's point, making a recommendation either way with only the financials, with only the programmatic alignment, or anything else. We wanted to also to understand, would there be cultural compatibility between these agencies? So we measured those things. We found that they had common ground in some ways. They had definitely had common external factors and influences happening. They both were seeing a loss of core funding on both sides, so they had a financial reason to start talking, and they both were seeing an increase in certain services for their rural communities. So they thought that their hypothesis going in was we could probably make this work. And when we did measure the culture with many other measures besides this, their two actual operating cultures and operating models, we found that their similarities were pretty thin. Culturally, that they had many marked differences in the styles that they approached pretty much all the work that they did, how they made decisions, what kind of leadership style that they approved of and what kind that they didn't approve of latently. And we got to the bottom of why that executive director sharing wasn't working, and also why it was working. And by articulating that, something they had already experienced, we could forecast into the future what they might be looking at in terms of challenges if they were to merge, as well as ways that they could potentially cooperate if they didn't merge, but could find ways beyond what they were already doing as neighbors to cooperate between programs and functions and shared things like that. So ultimately, we recommended that they merge with caveats. And they decided as two boards at the time that the caveats were strong enough that they didn't want to merge, but they took the information that we were able to provide and found ways that they could increase their impact in both communities and across the communities based on their knowledge of each other and now how they could communicate about the ways that they go about their business, how they engage with their funders, how they engage with their partners, as well as how they engage with each other. They were now able to put a language to that and actually measure around where they could make improvements that they hadn't even thought of before. So they didn't merge, but they're still in existence and still growing and making big impacts in bigger ways.
And some online that know our circumplex and all might say that, well, that larger agency, they need that smaller agency, and that very constructive approach. Right. But again, it's okay with caveats. A lot of the system structures, processes that are reinforcing that culture might have to change in the integrated organization.
Absolutely.
And it doesn't sound like they were prepared to take
that
risk.
Their language was, we don't want to be swallowed up by the giant who is kind of beholden to their processes and their structures and their grants.
And what they thought they were asking for, if you look at that smaller agency, they were asking for what appears to be some of the rigor in the larger agency, right? Some of that, the rigor and the process in there. But when they saw what that rigor in that process meant to, their way of being, they said, well, we kind of do want the rigor, but we do want some of this other stuff, that comes with it. So how can we find a way to blend that and make ourselves more successful going forward?
They both just learned a ton from each other. They're having conversations that wouldn't have been thinkable in the past about how they could share resources, how they could bring one program to the other side of that boundary that they had created without any strings attached, because they weren't at odds anymore about what was the intent behind this. What's your motivation? Well, our motivation is that we operate in a very affiliative way and we want relationships with everyone. And our motivation is that we want to make sure that when we get the money and we implement certain funding, that we do that in the right way with a lot of compliance and a lot of controls. And so they can speak that language with each other now.
Okay, excellent. Steve?
Well, so how can this work for you? I think that's the huge $1 million question in this webinar today, and the huge thing that we're talking about. But it really starts with that first step. You have to decide that this is something important for you.
Yeah.
We can sit here and we can talk all day about why culture is important and how you can be more successful. You might decide that, well, we're successful enough, and this is not important to me. Or we might decide that, we got this. We don't need to go forward. But I suspect you're on this webinar this morning because you're thinking about, well, maybe this is important to me, and it's important to my organization going forward. And it's important about getting a deeper understanding about how I operate and behave so that I can do better at adapting to the future going forward. And that's a big, big, hairy step for you to take. And so as you think about that, and if you decide that it is important and you decide that this is the thing that you want to do to help your organization move forward, our suggestion to you is learn a little bit more. Right. Learn a little bit more about not just the tool, because the tool is just one piece of the puzzle, but learn about what the results of the tool might help you do. If you go back and you look at the strategic initiatives that you might have in your strategic plan today, and you go back and do a little bit of self-evaluation on those strategic initiatives and say, where are we successful and where are we stuck? Right? We can begin to understand those connections, and we can begin to build on it, and we can begin to learn about how really evaluating the culture or behaviors in our organization going forward can help us understand how to be more successful in the initiatives that you're really undertaking and the things that you want to do going forward. So that's a really a little bit of a scary step sometimes, Tim.
It definitely
is. Because we have to look inside ourselves as an organization, because we all want to think that we're successful at everything. And it's very rare that we admit sometimes as an organization that maybe we're less than successful. But there's a saying out there that says it's okay to fail, but it's only okay if you fail fast.
Right.
Right. And we all fail at things that we do and things that we try to take going forward, and understanding that why and getting over it so that we don't repeat that. Culture can become a very important part of that journey going forward. And in really going through and in step 3 there of really mapping out, well, what's the culture journey? But more importantly, even beyond the culture journey, how does that culture journey support the strategic initiatives and the actions that we're trying to take as an organization going forward.
So I know yesterday Seth and I facilitated our learning method experience called the Culture Journey with a large group of nonprofits, and it really is all about learning. That's what many people miss about culture, that if culture is originally created and evolves through shared learning and mutual experience, unfortunately, taking that first step, people think, I don't know enough about it. I don't want to make a mistake, that type of thing. But with a little bit of coaching and understanding, I mean, we use this left side, right side comparison of the current status is we don't really understand culture. We can't measure it. We're not connecting it to our strategic plan, or it's very haphazard at best. We're not connecting it to how do we hire, develop, all those things. The opportunity on the right side, when you think about the impact, is so huge that we've got to understand this. It's hopefully a compelling story to get people confident enough to take that first step.
And we all think, we know we have a lot of challenges, right? We have challenges with talent and hiring the right people and retaining the right people. Understanding this piece is really going to help you on that journey and help you create the organization that you want to see going forward. And as you look at the 4-phase approach here that we generally recommend to people of walking through this process, it's really a stepped effort to help you learn and understand, checkpoint, and go forward.
And we're using this framework that was behind our culture and performance quick start program that we launched just about a year ago. And I know Wipfli will show a version of this that you've been creating, your Catalyst program, but it's really in every organization. Kind of what's your way at approaching uniting your organization behind your culture, strategy, priorities, and the 4 phases, being able to clarify our purpose. What is the business problem? Let's understand how our culture is helping us and holding us back, but in different ways. Then from that learnings, let's be able to really zero in on improvement plans with much more clarity, and in phase 3, how we're engaging people, how we're connecting it to the implementation, so we, at least on that priority, overcome some of those passive aspects we saw in the one agency, or be more task oriented, measurement focused in the other agency. Seth, how's this been resonating as far as I guess the big picture of culture and culture change?
I think it's a global and holistic approach that can be adopted by almost every client we work with, from small startup nonprofits of 5-10 people all the way to really scaled organizations that have been around 50 years and grown without much kind of intentionality behind their growth. We see this alignment between, I think, in the marketplace in general for nonprofits who are getting behind more design thinking, more iterative type approaches, a lot of technology adoption going on, where agile is much smarter for a nonprofit than a large investment in a big waterfall kind of approach of let's slam all this technology in at once. No, let's test this out. Let's try to align some of the strategic initiatives we have to technology as a parallel here, and make sure that we're testing it, seeing how it fits, seeing if it makes sense, if we're using it, and then step 2, step 3, step 4. Same kind of parallel with culture. I think it's resonating very well. Let's measure and take a baseline and understand where we're at, where we're trying to go, what the gap is between the two, and then let's slowly build some bridges across that gap and see how they're working out and learn from that. And as we learn, we can go faster, we can accelerate that process a little more because we have a lot more people that understand it, a lot more people behind us that understand what kind of stylistic behavioral change we're making alongside these results, and especially when we can show results quickly and keep measuring those results. The results speak for themselves, and people then are reinforced in all the behavior change that they're making. So this kind of approach really fits well. Process improvement is another area that we could get into. That's plan, do, check, act. It's almost the same kind of style. And so I think that the people that we've worked with over time, or that are just out there trying to improve themselves and thinking about different ways to do that, understand that we can't do it all at once. It's a giant elephant sometimes, and it took a long time to get our culture to where it is now, whether it's really aligned to our ideals and our values or it's misaligned. And it doesn't have to take obviously that long to unwind it, because we have great tools and an approach to do it, but we can take our time in terms of building really kind of momentum towards success.
And we talked about how that after you take that first step with this structure, as well as your Catalyst program, we'll take a look at it's that first 90 days. You're covering kind of phase 1, phase 2 here, and learning so much about your organization, getting a common language around this that really can inform your strategic plan at a whole nother level. Then we had the question yesterday about, well, how do we connect this with our strategic plan? We do that every 3 years. The first time through is the hardest, but then we can look back and say, hey, our priority was this area where we wanted to get much more achievement-oriented, data-driven in this program.
Right.
The second year, we expanded it to these areas, and now we're really connecting it to our strategic plan in a kind of an all-in approach.
Right,
yep.
So it's this process, and that it's not going to stop. It's not like if we're not seeing the results in 3 months, let's just try something else.
Yeah.
It's let's learn from that. What didn't work that we implemented
Right.
with that core team or whatever it might be.
Well, and tying it to that business problem, right?
Right.
That purpose that we go back to, that's such a huge step. Right? And culture is just it's part of that journey. There are obviously other things that we have to act on there, and the 4-step approach here allows us to bring all of those components to the table of the things that you have to do, of which culture is a major component, and really helps us see how we can engage the organization to move us forward and get to the growth and increased impact that we're working towards.
I think on that previous slide, you don't have to go back, but one of the scariest things for the top leaders we work with in nonprofits is not necessarily how do we start, how do we get the funding to start, I don't know where to start. That could be daunting. But one of the scariest things is looking into the future in any duration and not having control or an understanding of how to forecast where we're going to be in 3 years, in 5 years, and having some kind of influence or control over that. And even though culture might not be in that conversation right now about where we're going and how we're going to get there, culture is one place where we know how to help those leaders grasp a concept, grasp an actual vision for where they're going, and then map and plan that vision out in a stepwise approach that they can actually have a lot of influence over and don't need to just kind of let it go to the winds. All these other places with the external forces that are going on with nonprofits are really tough for our top leaders to deal with. They don't know how necessarily to forecast budgets. They don't know how to forecast payroll and the staffing that they need. But this is one place where we can help to guide their journey on those strategic initiatives and really in sustainability and survival through a lot of external forces that we just can't predict.
So we'll often say, and we said it yesterday in the Learning Map session, hey, we want to educate people on what culture is, how it evolves, how to connect it to your performance priorities, and whether you use our tools or not.
Yeah.
Please, include these types of things in your approach. So talk about these 5 keys to success that I know you've embedded in your Catalyst program.
So we've really, with lots of admiration and sort of respect in our own learning process over the 3 years, adopted Human Synergistics Quick Start program and made a version of that we know we can work with our nonprofit leaders and our nonprofit agencies, and we're calling it the Catalyst program. It has the same process flow, or the same flow that you just described, Tim, and we talked about, and it has these 5 key success factors that are built into it. So the first is making sure that you're evaluating your organization's current culture. You have to know where you came from, how that culture evolved, and how it developed, and where you are right now in order to improve. It's almost like the doctors say, like you're not going on a diet, you're not changing anything without stepping on the scale and taking a baseline and understanding where you're at now.
And this isn't checking your temperature. This is the full physical.
That's right. That's right.
As painful as that might be.
Yeah. The process isn't painful. The outcomes we don't know. We'll have to see.
Absolutely.
But then, of course, with measurement, we want to make sure that we're doing something constructive with that information. And so our next real key success factor is to create or adjust our plans for our top business priority. Wrap that culture information around context that matters to the organization, to your communities, and to all of your employees, as many of your employees as you can. So you're choosing something that really impacts everybody, and that you have either the metrics or just the knowledge in your organization and your community of what will be impactful as you succeed in getting there.
Okay.
So we choose that next. Then we adopt this language and the proven behaviors that we've measured and understood to be our kind of best impact of ourselves. What is the best sense of our mission and values? And we want to use to maximize our culture. So we're choosing. We're not using the entire broad spectrum of all the information we have, but we're using our learning to understand where can we lever the most of what we are and what we can be, and how do we take the styles that we think will be the most impactful towards those end goals.
And based on the business problem, I know you also use the from to shift kind of language to really zero in on.
Yeah, we're always kind of coming back to that from to shift, and what is the gap between what's said and what's done.
Okay.
As well. And then we really unite our organization behind that strategy, behind the knowledge that we have and our approach and where we're going. And we make sure that we have an inclusive approach, the cross-functional team, the leadership team that you mentioned before, and how do we engage then the rest of the teams in this process. And engagement is a big deal for us. It's not hard once we know what we're uniting behind. I think it's daunting for many clients we're talking to up front about this process. Well, we have to take people off the line and we're going to invest all this time. It doesn't have to be a lot of time if it's quality time and it's focused. And so we're really trying hard to engage. And then most organizations, because they're so busy, they're wearing multiple hats, they have so limited funding, they need a partner in order to help them through this. It doesn't have to be us, as you said, Tim, but we know nonprofits well. We understand a lot of the complexities and a lot of the challenges that are here now and probably happening in the next 2 to 5 years and beyond. And so we've really made sure that we're trying to be the best partner we can be in terms of how we can scale this for nonprofits, how we can price this kind of service and advice and Sherpa this process kind of through the unknown right now to get to a place of certainty, especially in those first 90 days, those first critical 90 days of getting a start and creating that common mutual experience and understanding of the types of measures we're taking and the language we're using and how to align that with your top business priorities.
Well, and I always emphasize 3 main things on why you should consider getting some help. And first of all, they can help educate, right, about this important topic, how to approach it, because most people haven't been through many transformations,
right,
like you guys have. Secondly, they're an accountability source, right? They're going to check in. We're going to have plans, the whole follow-up type thing. But they're also going to bring best practices and things on that business problem, that specific nonprofit challenge that you've seen elsewhere. Mm-hmm. So there's so much to be gained by just a little bit of coaching along the way. Hey, if you can't afford it, if you can't figure it out, if you've tried and we just can't scrape it together, right, then use some of the proven approaches and try and learn from it and build some momentum, and then maybe you can get some help to accelerate it even more.
Well, and that help really, there's one other piece I would add to what you said, which is sometimes challenging and asking the hard questions.
Yeah.
Right. And really stepping back and saying, help me understand why you're doing this or why you don't think you can do this.
Okay.
And really working with the organization to get to that next level. Now, it doesn't mean that not right or wrong, but it's really thinking through the process and understanding.
So I want to talk about how to learn a little bit more about this topic. Wipfli, your Vegas conference, which we'll probably be at together again.
Right.
You got some big things planned. So how can we learn more?
So the best way to learn more is obviously in today's day and age, jump on our website, although there are a lot of people behind that website. So we have the information for you if you're watching this now and participating, or you're watching it later. We're here, and as Steve said, we're a macro regional organization. We're all over the United States. We do have that Vegas conference yearly. It's our 20th anniversary conference coming up, and we're planning and intending to make a big splash. One of the things we have planned is to not just work directly with individual agencies, which we do well at and we do all the time, but create a cohort of nonprofits that are experiencing the same kind of challenges, have similar kinds of concerns about their internal workings, their culture, their climate, put them together and have them go through mutual learning and shared experiences together as part of a cohort. That would involve research that could compare and contrast their organization's benchmarks, as well as learning from each other as they go through the process of prioritizing their top business priority and approaching it from the standpoint of an educated leader in terms of culture and how we're shifting our culture and evolving our culture to support those initiatives.
Okay, Steve, why don't you wrap us up with any final comments for our...
Well, first of all, I want to thank you all for taking the time to spend with us this morning or this afternoon or wherever you're at and helping to learn a little bit more. You've taken the first big step, which Tim already said, which is a willingness to learn. And we're happy to help you as you go through that journey. Feel free to call us, ask us questions, try to understand more. It's not just about getting you to do this. It's about helping your organization create the impact that you want to create in your community. This is one part and one step, and we're happy to talk with you and try to listen and understand and provide some of our expertise and feedback to you as you continue the journey in your community.
All right. Well, thanks, guys, for joining us today, and very excited about our work together, hopefully seeing some of the attendees in Vegas and hopefully hearing from them before then about how to help them on their journey. We'll be producing some more thought leadership together and
Absolutely.
other resources and tools, but we wanted to give it a good kickoff with this session. So
Thank you,
thanks
Tim.
a lot.
Thanks a lot, Tim.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you,
All right,
Seth.
and thank you
Thanks, Steve.
everybody online, and maybe we'll see you in Vegas.
Yep.
Right, shut her off.